Local elections were held in Turkey on March 30, 2014, with some repeated on June 1, 2014. Metropolitan and district mayors as well as their municipal council members in cities, and muhtars and elderly councils in rural areas were elected. In light of the controversy around the elections, it was viewed as a referendum on the government of Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. About 50 million people were eligible to vote. A local government reorganization took place before the election, lowering the total number of elected officials from 38,592 to 23,132. Almost 1,500 beldes had their municipalities abolished, meaning that a significantly fewer number of mayors were elected compared to the 2009 local elections. Most provinces no longer elect any provincial councillors. The number of metropolitan municipalities, however, rose from 16 to 30. The elections were marred by allegations of electoral fraud and violence, with both opposition and ruling party candidates alike refusing to recognize a wide variety of results. Significant cases of fraud in Ankara and Yalova were referred to the Supreme Electoral Council of Turkey for review. Allegations of misconduct included the untimely power cuts in several areas while the votes were being counted, intimidation by government forces such as the European Union Minister Mevlut Kırtasiyevu and the Anatolian Agency in electorally strategic districts, the theft and burning of votes cast for opposition candidates and the recording of opposition votes as invalid or blank. The elections had been controversial due to allegations of government corruption, voter bribery and the lack of up-to-date voter records beforehand. Regardless, the governing Justice and Development Party declared victory in the early hours of March 31, gaining 42.89% of the vote, 818 municipalities and 11,309 councillors. The opposition Republican People's Party came second with 26.34%, 232 municipalities and 4,320 councillors, announcing that it would be filing complaints against alleged electoral manipulation. By April 4, 2014, numerous municipalities changed mayors following recounts. Gradual post-election revelations of alleged widespread irregularities in several cities sparked pro-democracy protests after provisional results were announced, while the Electoral Council declared results in some areas null and void. A repeat of the elections in these areas took place on June 1. These most notably occurred in Yalova and Ara +or-, in which the ruling AKP had lost by a small margin to the CHP and BDP respectively on March 30. In a first of a series of trials relating to electoral fraud claims, a returning officer was sentenced to 5 years in prison in June 2015 after being found guilty of transferring CHP votes to the AKP. Background: Turkish local elections are held every 5 years in order to elect mayors to 30 metropolitan municipalities, 1,008 district municipalities and 2,187 town municipalities. In addition, an excess of 53,450 neighborhood leaders are elected, though most are non-partisan and do not have any declared political allegiance. Elderly and municipal council compositions were also elected through a separate ballot. The previous elections were held on March 29, 2009 and were won by Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's AKP with 38.8% of the vote. Local government reform. Before the elections, the numbers of councillors and mayors were reduced during the 2013 Turkish local government reorganization. During the reorganization, 1,040 beldes were abolished, leaving the number of small-town municipalities at 394 and contributing to the reduction in the number of mayors elected in 2014 in comparison to 2009. The following table shows the numbers of metropolitan and district municipalities, as well as provincial and municipal councillors elected in 2009 and in 2014. In local elections, municipal mayors and councillors are the only partisan officials elected. 2013 Euro 2014 anti-government protests. In 2013, a spate of anti-government protests and countermeasures took place. The 2014 local elections are the first elections since the protests, and have thus been seen as a test for the government's popularity following a criticism both domestically and internationally for what was perceived to be a crackdown on peaceful protesters. The controversy surrounding the police response resulted in Germany seeking to delay European Union accession talks with Turkey. December 17 corruption scandal equals. On December 17, 2013, police arrested several close associates and family members of government ministers as part of a corruption investigation. Prime Minister Erdoğan responded by either dismissing or reassigning thousands of police and judicial personnel while denying all allegations of wrongdoing. A string of recorded phone calls between government ministers and close supporters allegedly discussing corruption were made public following the start of the corruption scandal. On February 24, 2014, a 10-minute phone call between Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and his son Necmettin Bilal Erdoğan were made public, in which the Prime Minister was warning his son of police searches in other government ministers' residences and telling him to nullify any cash which might be stored in their own. The tape caused particular damnation, after which CHP leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu a section Dario advised the Prime Minister to flee by helicopter. The Prime Minister responded by calling the tape a montage, though this claim could not be verified by the National Scientific Development Agency Tak. It was reported that 6 people were removed from their roles at Tak for refusing to falsify the recording, with one reporting that he was openly asked by superiors to manipulate reports related to the recordings. Following the release, thousands took to the streets demanding the government's resignation. Protesters threw fake money in the air and also left empty shoe boxes near AK party offices, symbolizing the $4.5 million found stuffed into shoe boxes at the home of Halk Bank's former manager Zarwan Kurtuleyman Aslan. Though protests were not as large as the June 2013 Gezi protests, the police were again criticized for a brutal crackdown. Judiciary, Internet and muhtars laws equals. The government responded to the tape revelations by pushing through 3 controversial laws which would tighten the AKP's grip on the judiciary, allow greater control over Internet access, and increase the powers of Turkey's intelligence services. While some saw these laws as necessary to restore peace throughout the country and increase Internet safety, the opposition accused the government for openly attempting to increase their powers in order to further defame the rule of law. Regardless, the AKP's sizable parliamentary majority led to all laws being passed by the Turkish Grand National Assembly. The laws also caused a rift between Prime Minister Erdoğan and President Abdullah Gül Kurtulmuş, who criticized some aspects of the laws. Regardless of their differences, the president signed the bills into law despite speculation that he might veto them. The new laws drew criticism from the public, with several demonstrators taking to the streets accusing the government of encroachments against their rights and privacy. Protesters again clashed with police, though the protests failed to materialize back to June 2013 levels. Twitter and YouTube bans equals. On March 20, 2014, 10 days before the elections, Prime Minister Erdoğan threatened to wipe out Twitter during an election rally in Bursa. Thousands of Turkish web users found that they could not access the site hours after the speech, with the government claiming that Twitter had failed repeatedly to adhere to Turkish court orders requiring the removal of some links. Despite causing outrage, the Twitter ban was almost completely overcome by users simply changing DNS settings. The government retaliated just a few days before the elections by blocking Google's DNS service, making defiance more difficult. Regardless, Erdoğan blocked Twitter, Twitter is blocked and Turkey blocked Twitter began trending worldwide soon after news of the ban was made public. On March 21, 2014, Ankara's Attorney General issued a statement denying the government's claims that they had a court order validating the ban on Twitter. The ban's practical failure and its violation of Internet freedoms received criticism, and the U.S. House of Representatives was presented with 2 resolutions condemning the Turkish government for blocking Twitter and YouTube. On April 2, 3 days after the elections, the Turkish Constitutional Court issued a verdict annulling the Twitter ban for its violation of Article 26 of the Turkish Constitution. On March 28, 2014, the telecommunications regulator made use of the government's new controversial internet law by blocking YouTube without court order. The ban occurred shortly after the release and placing on YouTube of a recorded conversation allegedly between the Deputy Armed Forces Chief of Staff Yahya Gharwan Kortula, Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, Foreign Ministry Under-Secretary Feridun Sinalioglu and Ministry of Intelligence Under-Secretary Hakan Fidan. In the conversation, Fidan was allegedly recorded considering a deliberate act of military aggression against Syria in order to spark a war. While not confirming the validity of the recording, Prime Minister Erdoğan claimed that the making of the recording was treacherous, and that YouTube had subsequently been blocked due to concerns for national security. Pre-election rigging controversies. In the lead-up to elections, both the ruling AKP and opposition parties warned that preparations for substantial electoral fraud were being taken. In December 2013, it emerged that several voters had been made members of different political parties without their approval in an attempt to bolster support without their consent. Voters affected appealed to the Prosecutor General's office after it emerged that their details had been used to register them. On February 29, 2014, a recording of a phone call between Ankara Metropolitan Mayor Mligar Paragraph Car Section Ek and the Prime Minister's Secretary Mustafa Varank allegedly depicted both agreeing to censor the opposition CHP's election posters. The recording has not yet been proven to be either legitimate or fake. Concerns were raised in Ankara as CHP Metropolitan mayoral candidate Mansur Yavarak claimed that there were 58,000 duplicate records in Ankara alone that would allow select voters to vote twice. He also announced that his election team would do everything to prevent such manipulation. The MHP candidate Mevlut Kortatika also called for voters and ballot officials to remain vigilant. Meanwhile, the incumbent AKP candidate Mligar Paragraph Car Section Ek accused marginal groups of plotting to rig the elections, blaming them for the AKP's losses in Ankara's Yenimahal, Timeskut and Gar Paragraph Lbaya plus or minus districts in the 2009 elections. The provisional results in Ankara, which initially showed a 0.9% lead for the AKP, were widely criticized by the opposition and caused a massive recounting campaign by the CHP. Turkish newspaper Cumhuriyet claimed that the Supreme Electoral Council of Turkey has printed 141,654,161 ballot papers despite an electorate formed of 52,695,831 voters. Some sources, including the YSK itself, put the number of ballot papers printed to between 144 and 151 million. The YSK responded by defending its decision, saying that it was required by law to send 15% more ballot papers extra to each ballot box. The YSK also reiterated that more than one ballot paper was required per voter since different ballots were used to elect municipal mayors, muhtars and city councils. Nevertheless, members of the opposition raised concern on how the extra ballot papers would be utilized, with MHP MPs warning that the spare ballot papers would be used by the PKK to increase the votes of the pro-Kurdish BDP in the southeast. Several controversies following the distribution of ballot papers to voters' residences before the elections raised concern about the validity of the YSK's voter records. Upon receiving extra ballot papers, several families complained to the YSK, claiming to have received more ballot papers than necessary. It was also observed that dead citizens were on the electoral roll, and several ballot papers had been sent to persons who had been dead for a considerable amount of time or false addresses which did not exist. On March 15, 2014, Ankara's AKP Mayor Mligar Paragraph Car Section X spoke on live television regarding the possible use of Chinese temporary tattoo pens whilst recording the results from each ballot box. This would allegedly mean that some results would completely disappear shortly after being recorded, allowing some groups to edit the numbers while transporting the ballot result papers to the YSK. The opposition CHP candidate Mansur Yavarak replied by calling the mayor paranoid, adding that he was a mayor from the ruling party. Rather than announcing these allegations on television, he should be taking legal action. On March 29, 2014, the police received a tip-off that large numbers of fake ballot papers were being stored at a printing press in the district of Kazimir in Izmir. Despite conducting a detailed search of the compound, the police failed to find any fake votes. Despite reports by several news agencies, the allegations that a van full of ballot papers with a pre-printed yes vote for the AKP was impounded on an Izmir's AA +or-Nala district could not be verified due to a similar situation being reported before the 2011 general elections. Another debate was on the voting rights of the 250,000 Syrian refugees living in Turkey due to the Syrian civil war. The controversy began in late 2013 after the CHP's deputy leader Garwan Kurtarse Eltkin claimed that several refugees had been registered on the electoral roll. The Ministry of the Interior responded by stating that a non-citizen within Turkey had to wait 5 years before being eligible to vote. However, it emerged that several Syrian refugees had been made Turkish citizens already. While the opposition claimed that Syrian votes would be used to bolster AKP support due to their lax border policies, the government and the Association for Solidarity with Refugees denied these claims. Nevertheless, 3 Syrians were caught attempting to cast votes during the elections. Parties: the incumbent National Party is the Justice and Development Party, and its principal opposition parties are the Republican People's Party and Nationalist Movement Party. The Peace and Democracy Party is a Kurdish party. The new left-wing party, the People's Democratic Party, is allied with it. Campaign: large-scale election rallies dominated the pre-election political scene, mostly being held by the governing AKP and the main opposition CHP. Conduct: about 50 million people were eligible to vote in 1379 electoral sees. On election day, violence resulted in 8 deaths. The Doğan news agency reported 6 deaths and 4 injuries in the village of Yavaca ±K in Angstrom Anla ±Yafa. It also reported that in Hatay rival families fought with clubs, knives and guns in support of their respective candidates, resulting in 2 deaths and 9 injuries. In the early hours of March 31, 1,418 claims of electoral fraud were reported. Power cuts during the counting process in some provinces, as well as the publication of widely different results by different news agencies, also caused controversy. Results. Below are the results for the elected councillors and municipal mayors. It should be noted that the number of councillor and mayoral positions up for election in 2014 vary widely in comparison to 2009. For this reason, the changes per party in terms of officials elected between 2009 and 2014 are not representative of party performance. Rather, the change in proportion of officials held per party is a more accurate comparison between party performances since 2009. However, it should also be taken into account that the abolition or introduction of several elected officials in certain areas where particular parties are the strongest has also led to disproportionate changes. Metropolitan municipality results district municipality results municipal councillor results provincial councillor results results by province The following results show winners by provinces of April 1, 2014. Metropolitan provinces are in bold. AKP denotes provinces won by the Justice and Development Party, CHP denotes provinces won by the Republican People's Party, MHP denotes provinces won by the Nationalist Movement Party, and BDP denotes provinces won by the Peace and Democracy Party. Complaints and recounts provisional results in several districts were contested by all major parties, including the governing AKP, claiming misconduct during the counting process and thus demanding a recount. Applications for recounts were made to the YSK shortly after the elections concluded. Turkey's Constitutional Court has rejected an individual application filed by Mansur Yavaş, the Republican People's Party's candidate for mayor in Ankara. Detailed results by province. The following articles document the results within the 3 main provinces of Turkey. Ankara mayoral elections, 2014, Istanbul mayoral elections, 2014, Izmir mayoral elections, 2014. See also, 2013 Turkish local government reorganization. References